Earlier this year, Major General John Canwell, the former commander of Australian forces in Afghanistan, warned of a tidal wave of psychological problems as Australian troops pull out of the 12-year conflict there. Next month, Australia's mission ends, and Major General Canwell says the country is obliged to care for the thousands of troops who are suffering the emotional wounds from that war. In South Australia, a group of Vietnam veterans have already taken it upon themselves to help recently returned veterans deal with post-traumatic stress. Trojan's Trek takes soldiers out bush into the Flinders Ranges, getting them to talk about their own experiences and hearing from Vietnam veterans about where they made mistakes re-entering civilian life. In a moment, we'll talk to John Cantwell, but first let's head to the Flinders Ranges, where I recently spent time with the men who run Trojan's Trek. This story was shot and edited by Brant Cumming. The horrors of war don't leave soldiers once they leave the battlefield. The sights, the smells and the sounds of combat can haunt veterans for the rest of their lives. Here in the Flinders Ranges, a group of Vietnam veterans are helping recently returned soldiers deal with the traumas of war.
This is wilderness therapy. This helped me when I was going through the pits. When I was in the pit of my life, I came up here with my dog and I stayed up here for some months, and it put everything back in perspective.
This trek is about helping younger veterans. It's just about that simple. And we help them by bringing them up here to a remote locality where they can stock take and analyse their own interaction with the community and the ones that they love, their families and children.
Since Michael returned from Afghanistan, he struggled with post-traumatic stress.
I was involved in a pretty traumatic incident, contact overseas, when my 2IC got killed. And so I've struggled a fair bit with coming to terms with what happened that day, with what I saw that day. And so I have come here to try and, I guess, changed my thought patterns and thinking on how I react to certain situations.
Sean survived insurgent attacks in Afghanistan before suffering nerve damage to his feet from frostbite.
And now I've got to find a job at a desk, not outdoors where I want to be. I had to give up the army. I couldn't move on to police or fireys or ambos or, can't really do much on my feet anymore. Had to, give up a lot of the fitness training that I did. I can't run anymore. I can't even walk, 20 metres without being in pain.
For many of these men, just turning up here was a battle.
I was very, very close to just pulling the pin and walking out of the airport and calling Mrs. saying, "Nah, can't do this, come pick me up, I'll can it, I'll do it another year, I'll do it some other time." Thankfully for me, I sort of had a jog in my thinking, and it was the fact that the RAR Association of the Queensland branch had sort of helped fund me to come down here, and I'm mates with a lot of the guys within that organisation, and I thought to myself, look, these guys are going out on a limb to get me down here and try and help me, and I don't want to let them down.
Your aim at being an interesting and an interested grandfather.
The older veterans give no-nonsense advice. They want these men to avoid the mistakes that they've made adapting to civilian life.
Basically, I tell them what happened to me. I tell them how, until I got rid of the booze, I could not defog. I couldn't think properly, and I didn't even really know who I was. To be honest with you, I was a bit of a rat bag and a wild man, and I've hurt a lot of people in my life, who I'm sorry about, but I'm trying to say to them, you don't need to go down that track, you can stop wherever you like. And I have triggers in my head like, I said to them, put a D on front of the word anger. The danger is to you, mate, it's to no one else. So start learning how to deal with it.
The older veterans teach the younger veterans techniques they've learned about dealing with post-traumatic stress. And they set them goals, like leaving a legacy for future generations.
Because I'm telling you that some people go through their lives as a victim path the whole way. Poor me, it's not my fault. I never got a good education. I can't help it. My dad used to beat me up. Somebody stole me push bike when I was 7. And when they go out the other end, nobody ever visits their grave. Or where they were scattered, people don't remember them because they left no legacy. They just whinged and whined their way through life.
But it's not just what the elders say to them, it's about what they say to each other. The men open up around the campfire and talk about things they don't normally talk about. Veterans from a range of conflicts find common ground. The discussions continued late into the night. The morning after, and there's still plenty of noise around the campfire. Many of the men feel lighter for last night's campfire conversations.
Sort of like smoke shed therapy, you know. No doctors, but you walk away feeling a lot better because you got some stuff off your chest. So it was good, and I reckon it was better than if we were drinking or carrying on, you know, like, because it gets messy after a while. I actually surprised myself in talking to blokes that I've only just met yesterday. Yeah, sharing the stories I shared with them, it was, you know, really surprised me. That I woke up this morning going, you know, almost like, was that a dream? Did that happen?
Last night I was talking to a fellow who was in tears, and he said to me, he said, "This has helped me enormously." And I said, "How is that? Why the tears? Why is it helping you?" He said, "I had plans not to be here by Christmas." Now he's a married man with kids who's planning his demise. And you think, my God, and no one even knows about it.
3 days into the one-week trek, and already these Afghanistan veterans are seeing the benefits.
I've noticed a change in myself already, even though it's only been, what, 2-3 days.
I've found the last 2 days phenomenal. Yeah, it's really been great.
Trojan's Trek relies on donations from corporates and the South Australian government. Moose Dunlop hopes the program can get guaranteed funding and be expanded into other states.
It would be an enormous help if the program was funded, that is guaranteed funding, so that we could spend more of our productive time on product improvement rather than trying to run chook raffles and raise a few bob.
With over 25,000 defence personnel having served in Afghanistan, programs like Trojan's Trek will be critical in the years to come. Former commander of Australian forces in Afghanistan, retired Major General John Canwell, has written about his own struggles with post-traumatic stress disorder in his book Exit Wounds. He joined me earlier from Maroochydore in Queensland. John Canwell, thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome. Thanks, Steve.
From the story we've just seen, we got a sense of the kind of benefits that peer-to-peer counselling can provide for veterans. What are your thoughts on this kind of wilderness therapy, as Dogs Carney calls it?
Look, I think it's fantastic. Any sort of activity that gets veterans into a situation where they feel comfortable, where they can trust those around them and open up and talk about issues that are troubling them has got to be a winner, and this is a winner of a proposal.
You said trust. How important is that? Because I know that when you sought help initially when you had post-traumatic stress, you came across people who didn't really understand your situation.
Yeah, look, trust is a vital part of it. It's really hard for someone who has been through a stressful situation, whether they're a veteran or, you know, even more broadly, a police officer, ambulance officer, etc. But let's talk about veterans. They do feel as though they are a distinct group and have had unique experiences, and it's therefore part of their culture to share with their mates who have been through something similar. It's very hard, therefore, for them to open up to, you know, a physician, a psychologist, or even a bureaucrat. They feel much more comfortable where there are certain understood elements to their story, and then they can sort of talk about their own place in it.
A paper recently delivered at the Australasian Military Medicine Conference provided evidence that this program is actually working. According to the study, of those who met the criteria for severe stress before they went on Trojan's Trek, 78% of them did not meet the same criteria 2 months afterwards. Do organisations like this need more funding, more resources?
Well, if those figures are accurate, and I've got no reason to doubt it, because it is a wonderful program, I know something about it, and I know both the guys who are running it, it's tremendous to see those sort of outcomes. Now, if we can take that model, that process, and apply it elsewhere, well, why wouldn't we? I know from my own experience that being able to talk about the issues was just such an important part of starting to heal. Once you start to talk, things get better. But if you bottle it up, that's when real problems can arise.
I'm wondering what you think about the role that it plays for the mentors as well. These are men who've suffered post-traumatic stress themselves, but this is giving them a purpose, isn't it? This is providing worthwhile work for them to be doing, to be putting back into the veteran community and the younger generations.
Look, I think what they're doing is just tremendous. It's heroic. It's not easy. It's not easy to sort of open up because they tell their own stories, and that's hard. So they're offering, you know, private insights. They're trusting those younger guys with their stories, and that's why it is so powerful, because they then feel able to respond and open up. I think it's just tremendous. As I know both of the fellows concerned, Dogs Carney was one of my instructors when I was a young guy, and Moose Dunlop he's just a man of great insight with a tremendous plan. I think what they're doing is absolutely fantastic, and I just wish that they didn't have to, scrape around for funding, do fundraisers and the like. Why do we fund them? Well, it's not expensive, surely, and it's something I think we could afford to do.
Over 25,000 defence personnel have served in Afghanistan over the last 12 years. Now, you're concerned that the end of the mission will bring on even more cases of post-traumatic stress. What are your concerns?
Well, my concern is that not only are there people who are already presenting with post-traumatic stress symptoms as a result of their service, whether it's in Afghanistan or whether it's the Navy crews who are doing that difficult and very disturbing work, rescuing or recovering the bodies of boat people arriving off our borders to the northwest of Australia. It doesn't matter who you are; these are profoundly important issues that affect the individuals and affects their families. I know from my own experience that these can be really corrosive situations, and it's so important that we, as a society, as Australian people, we should recognise these people, and I think we do increasingly, but we now need to take the next step and provide proper resourcing, proper funding, proper frameworks so that these people who have done so much for us can be looked after when they need some help.
Because the mission is finishing, does that mean the lid is coming off, in a sense, that some of these men and women would have been going back and back and back and keeping a lid on it, but once that mission finishes, that then maybe that pressure cooker explodes? Is there something in that?
Look, I think there is something. There's two issues there. Repeat exposures are, I think, now an accepted factor in the development of post-traumatic stress disorder. So we've had lots of people being repeatedly exposed to things that have shocked and horrified and disturbed them. So that's a factor. The fact that they are now no longer on operations and perhaps thinking about leaving the service, and they will eventually, there is a time factor as well. Not everybody presents straight up. Not everyone starts to show the symptoms or even be aware they have them, but they do eventually come out, and the time lag is simply unknown. It can be months, it can be many years, and we just need to be ready to accept that at some point in the service and then the post-service lives of our veterans and other first responders in our community, that they may well struggle, and we need to be there to help them out.
In Exit Wounds, you wrote about how you were haunted by the lives lost in Afghanistan. I'm wondering if it weighs heavily on you what's happening to these young men as they come back in society and as they're struggling, like Mick and Sean in that story we just heard before, as they're struggling to adapt back into civilian life?
Look, I do worry about them. I worry about them a lot, and they are just two examples of thousands of veterans either having these issues or are likely to have them. About 20% of all those we've sent to the various wars that Australia has been in, and other traumatic things like, rescuing or pulling from the water men and women and children who are trying to get to this country. Those things will leave a mark, and it just is a sad fact that their service, their honourable, proud service to our nation, is likely to leave a scar on them, and that it will affect them, and it will affect their mates, and it will affect their families.
Let's talk more about the families, because we know from the Vietnam veteran experience that the children of Vietnam veterans are 3 times more likely to commit suicide than the rest of the population. Are these the forgotten people in this circumstance, and do we need to do more about providing counselling to help them?
Look, I think we do need to do more about our families. They are certainly those who bear the brunt of the occasional bad behaviour, if you like, the symptoms of PTSD, the mood swings, the anger, the sense of distance and isolation, perhaps, drinking too much, all of those symptoms. The first ones who cop that are the family, and particularly children who are, so vulnerable and easily confused about these issues. And as you've just said, it can have knock-on effects. I speak to so many groups of veterans and families and all sorts of people in our community, and I hear often people say, my family was broken by my dad's service, say in Vietnam. I never had a relationship, let's say, with my dad. Now, I'm pleased to hear that they now perhaps understand better why, but that doesn't solve the problem for them or all the thousands and thousands of other families. We need to do better for our families. We need to help them understand the issues, because in many cases they are confused. They don't understand what's happening. And we need to have a network that reaches out to them. We have veterans organisations that look after veterans. Fantastic. Who looks after the families? I think we can do better there.
When I was out bush talking to the returned soldiers, an issue that kept coming up all the time was their dealings with the Department of Veterans Affairs. They were feeling frustrated. They were feeling like it was very difficult to deal with the bureaucracy and people at the other end of a phone who may not have understood the horrors that they'd been through. Does that need to improve? And are you hearing those kind of things too, those kind of complaints from veterans about the department?
Look, I do hear people say things that about the Department of Veterans Affairs, that they're not happy, not satisfied. I think there's a couple of things need to be said. Firstly, I think the Department of Veterans Affairs is an organisation filled with great people who are trying to do the best for our veterans. They care about them. I know many of them. They're good people. They're working within the guidelines, the regulations that they have to apply. Sometimes those guidelines don't get the outcomes for the veterans. But that's not a reflection on the efforts made by the people in the organisation. But look, I would say this, the bureaucracy is sometimes a very difficult beast to deal with, and it's often the case that someone who's trying to get some support, some assistance, some recognition of their emotional trauma find it very hard to deal with the bureaucracy. They're perhaps at their least able to do that, because they are prone to anger, they're prone to frustration. And if they're asked to fill out, multiple forms and talk to someone who they know doesn't understand exactly their situation, you can understand why that produces frustrations. I have to say, in my dealings with the DVA, I was looked after very well. That's because I had an advocate, someone who was independent, did this voluntarily. When I was emotionally troubled, I was in no state to deal with DVA in terms of a big bureaucracy. My advocate did it and took all of that off my shoulders. And there are organisations, the RSL provides advocacy. The Vietnam Veterans Counselling Service has now transformed to the Veterans and Veterans Counselling Service. They provide a great asset there in terms of counsellors and also advocates. Why don't we make that a formal process?
You mentioned earlier that you are concerned about the trauma that people in the Navy may have to deal with in the operations to stop people smuggling in the waters in our north. What are you hearing about that? Are you hearing that the sailors are under great stress getting involved in these interventions?
Well, there can be no doubt that they are under stress and strain, and yes, I do know of specific examples of sailors who have had to fish bodies out of the water, who have been unable to make a rescue because of, terrible weather conditions and the like. And that's got to work on your heart. It'll affect, every one of us would be affected by that. And I've got no doubt that there are issues for those folks who are exposed to that type of activity, which they're doing you know, in accordance with government policy. I had a chance to speak to the Chief of Navy and all of his senior leadership group just a few days ago about this issue. I know that they're well aware of it
Are they
and are
concerned
anxious
about
to
it?
try to help. Of course they're concerned. I mean, they care about their people. All of the service chiefs care about their people, and they will do, you know, whatever they can. I've, you know, asked the Chief of Navy if he'd like me to talk to some of them. I'd be delighted to do that, and he's considering that. But look, it doesn't need just individuals. It needs an organisation to be responsive, and I am mostly satisfied that all of the services are now much more attuned to this and much more responsive and helpful of their people.
John Canwell, we'll have to leave it there. Thanks very much for coming in this evening.
You're welcome, Steve.